Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. I really think that we're seeing the exact same thing in a different sliver of a shade of gray, so to speak, as they get older, right? When they're younger, the most vulnerable thing is the growth plate, which is why, like you said, there's a traction apophysitis. There's a growth plate injury of the SLJ, which is the bottom of the kneecap, the inferior pole, or you have the tibial tuberosity or something. Like the only reason that is the cranky area is because it's the least ready to handle force. And so it becomes inflamed and irritated. But as somebody matures and they grow older, it becomes a patellar tendonitis. It becomes a quad tendonitis. It becomes an excessive lateral pressure syndrome, like a PFJ type subcategory, or like you're saying, starts to become really bad in a stress fracture. And then you get all the way up to the top end of advanced athletes that are in college or that are in elite. Their bones are fused. The growth plate is no longer the issue, but the high risk stuff is the cartilage and the meniscus, which has got so many years of getting beat up. So I think we see the exact same, case in front of us when there are severs versus an Achilles tendonitis versus an Achilles rupture. And I think we see the same thing in the Osgood slaughters becoming the patellar tendon, or the PFJ becoming a stress fracture or a meniscus issue or cartilage. I think it's all just from the same factors personally,
Research shows us that if in a more upright posture, it's more force by the quad, which is going to put more force into the knee. So the optimal amount of knee flexion is going to be about anywhere between 30 to 45 degrees of knee flexion, correct? More closer towards 45 degrees of knee flexion. So that allows the forces to be evenly distributed, and it puts less of a force vector from the quad to create more joint forces. And so it allows your glutes and your quads to work together rather than more upright posture is a more quad dominant movement.
I want to show this epically important meta-analysis. This is from Tim Hewitt. And this is probably the one that I cite the most, which is essentially, for those that are not familiar with research, the kind of like the gold standard is a randomized controlled trial. Then above that is called the meta-analysis. So they take all the RCTs and synthesize the data and say, what is the best recommendation? But Tim did a meta-analysis of all of the available meta-analyses. I think I said that right, menisci. Essentially was showing that if you combine a really good lower body leg strengthening program and proper landing mechanics, like Jan was just saying, it says right here, the summary of meta-analysis shows an overall 50% reduction in the risk of ACL tears in athletes and a 67% reduction for non-contact ACL injuries in females. So obviously we're talking about overuse stuff, but the same factors that create ACL risk also create patellar tendon issues, Osgood slaughters. So this essentially sums up in saying that by getting really strong legs and using weights and using dumbbells and barbells and landing properly, we could possibly reduce the risk of knee injuries, traumatic knee injuries, by 67% in young females. That's insane to me. I remember reading that stat and I was like, bro, 67% is bananas, which is why I'm such like a harper for strength training and such a harper for landing properly. You know what I mean?
So the knee is interesting because I think you had taught me this at one point. The knee is driven by hip and ankle function.
Yep.
And that's also a fundamental that we learn in school. But the way that you phrased it like that was like, oh, wow, that's really simple to understand.
Yep.
The knee is a very basic joint, but if you just treat the knee,
I said the knee is a dumb joint, actually.
Dumb joint. Basic dumb. I don't know. Seems like a nicer word.
No, I just
So the knee is a dumb joint. So if you don't treat the ankle and the hip, you're gonna have some problems. So I think the biggest thing is really addressing ankle mobility. I think most gymnasts are pretty good with hip flexion mobility. But it's ankle dorsiflexion that can be a big limitation. And if you don't screen it, you don't know that they're limited in dorsiflexion and if there's a difference from side to side. So really identifying that, and the easiest way that we can do that is with that weight-bearing dorsiflexion test that you use in so many of your training programs. 10 centimeters from the wall, making sure their big toe is lined up and they can touch their knee right to the wall in a lunge position.
Yep.
Easiest test, easy for coaches to do. If you see that a gymnast is having trouble landing properly in some of the drills, you need to identify whether it's a mobility restriction, if it's a motor control issue, or if it's both. That way you're not just saying, land like lighter, do this, do that. If they have a mobility restriction, their body's just going to continue to compensate, but you're not going to get the end goal. When I think about why overuse injuries are happening in gymnastics, I think it's easiest to kind of think about different categories of why it's happening. Like,
Mm,
it's hard to boil it down to like one cause, like with
mm,
anything, with any injury, but especially with overuse injuries. It's just there's so many factors that go into it. So I think like the biggest thing to look at is like training workload.
mm,
I mean, it's just an overuse injury, like, the definition is, like, an area of your body is overstressed to the point where it can't tolerate that load anymore,
mm,
and no matter how much, um, stretching, strengthening, movement training you do, if you don't change the overall workload, then you're not gonna fix the problem,
right.
or you're not gonna treat the source of the problem. So just training workload in general, I think is a really big deal. And I think it just boils down to 4 different categories. 1, training workload. 2, your gym culture.
Mm,
So if your gym culture is we push, 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 "Oh, coach, like, my knee's bothering me." Well, like, how bad is it? Do you
yeah.
like, keep going? Or is it, "What's going on? Let's talk about this."
Mm,
3rd category of things I would say are gymnast specific factors. So that would be strength, mobility, motor control patterns in their movements like squats, deadlifts, landings. And then the last category is gymnast factors outside of the gym. So nutrition, recovery, and your support network. Whether you have family that's communicating with you and there's an open relationship saying like I'm in pain when I'm in practice and it's carrying over to me being able to walk at school.
mm,
So I think the easiest way to look at it is just break it down into those 4 categories of training workload, gym culture, gymnast factors, and outside factors from the gymnast. I
yeah.
think just anywhere to get the body warmed up, that way you can get prepared for, doing some stretching, doing some soft tissue, especially to the quads. In gymnasts, their quads just get so tight and overworked from all of the jumping, landings, and our posterior chain, so our butt, our back, our hamstrings just aren't as strong as we would like, just because gymnastics is such a quad dominant sport. So soft tissue to the quads and then going in with some static stretching. I love that couch stretch where your back foot is up on the couch, tucking the tailbone under, just feeling a really nice stretch in the quads. If as a rehab professional, you can do manual stretching
Mm,
and then rolling right into some eccentrics.
mm,
So lengthening and strengthening the muscle, starting with maybe some split squats or rear foot elevated split squats if the gymnast really understands that movement pattern well,
yep.
and then rolling straight into things that I usually try to say less than a 5 out of 10.
Yep.
You know, 5 out of 10 is right that moderate level of pain. I don't want your pain to increase, but unfortunately, this might be a little bit painful. It's not going to be completely pain free,
Mm,
but we can do the best we can not to increase your pain and avoid sharp shooting pains. And usually I'll start with some table exercises, just kind of getting the posterior chain working with some bridges, starting double leg, if that feels okay, progressing them to single leg, and then figuring out ways if it's anterior knee pain and it's Osgood Slaughters or patellar tendinopathy, utilizing some isometrics for the quad just
yep.
for pain relief. And then from there, progressing them using, if it's patellar tendinopathy, using the Jill Cook's model of the tendon stoplight system, which is pretty much the same thing I was using before. You might have a little bit of pain, but if it's over a 5 out of 10, you're in the red. So make sure that the pain doesn't increase during therapy, after therapy, the next day, if it's over a 5. And so super basic things just to decrease pain in the beginning and then work the gymnast up from there. So it's okay if a lot of the exercises are on the table and maybe when they're really flared up that you need to do a little bit of more hands-on care. That's a perfect opportunity to establish rapport with your gymnasts
Mm,
and figure out what they like, figure out what's bothering them in gym, and just create an open line of communication where they're not afraid to tell you what's going on with their life.
Yep.
And then once they're starting to get back to gym, get back to things because it's not as painful, then you guys are buddies and you've established that relationship and
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
gymnast is comfortable.
For